Hello, welcome everyone to another book club with the Nomadic Network. I am Erica Verbo Hackman, and I'm here helping Matt with this whole Nomadic Network thing. And this is our third book club, and we're so excited to have Don George joining us. And we're discussing The Way of Wanderlust. If you guys don't know what book we're discussing, this is the one. And before we discuss it, I would just love to share my screen for a second and go over what TNN is about. And while I'm doing this, I would love for you to find the chat and just say where you're calling in from, what number TNN event this is for you, and what your favorite story from The Way of Wanderlust was. Okay, so welcome to the Nomadic Network. We are a community of travel enthusiasts which started at the end of 2019. And our whole goal was to bring travelers to each other and also to resources that can get them to travel cheaper, longer, smarter, and eventually more. And it went really well. We had 22 chapters launch and we had 40 events before the pandemic hit. And once the pandemic hit, we had to pivot like everybody else into virtual events. And so it actually worked out really well because we're able to reach people from all over the world and have speakers from all over the world talk to you guys. And so it's been pretty incredible. Right now, we offer 3 kinds of events. The first one is the one you're in today, which is a book club. These are always on the first Wednesday of every month, and they include the author. And so we really love these because it's a really unique opportunity to get your questions answered or to hear from the author what they were thinking about when they were writing the book, which is very unique. We also have speaker events where people come and present on a topic that is near and dear to their heart and related to travel. And then we also have happy hour events, which are put on regionally, except we're virtual. So really, if you're interested in a region, you can go to that happy hour event. And those are unmuted, everyone just talks to each other, and they're guided travel discussions. Those are the 3 kinds of TNN events we have right now. A few things to keep in mind for this event. Please turn your camera on. We love to see your faces. This is a community event, though you will be muted for the first half of this. And I want to say that you actually will be unmuted for the second half if you choose to ask a question. So you can ask your question directly to Don George and get it answered, which is pretty cool. If you are shy or you're not in a place that you can unmute yourself, you can feel free to just put question in the chat box and add your question and I'll read it out loud for you. I wanted to remind you that we're here to learn, satiate your wanderlust, and have fun. So lots of smiles. And our speakers, Don is doing this out of the kindness of his heart and his passion for sharing his knowledge. And I think you'll get that immediately when he starts speaking. I also wanted to remind you that if you miss any TNN replays from the beginning of the pandemic, you can sign up for our Patreon, which is an amazing membership site where you get access to all sorts of different aspects of the Nomadic Matt and the Nomadic Network, including free signed books, guides, live Q&As with Matt, and all the replays of TNN. So plus many other things. So if you want to learn more about that, patreon.com/nomadicmatt. And I will stop sharing my screen and let Matt introduce Don George, who is just a ray of sunshine. So I'm glad you guys are all here today, and I will mute myself for the time being. Bye.
Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome to our 3rd book club event, second one of the year. Once again, as Erica said, we do these on the first Wednesday of every month. And this month we have travel legend Don George talking about his book, The Way of Wanderlust. And the cover, by the way, is by Candace Rose Reardon, who is an awesome travel writer too, who has a book about tea. If you like tea, I highly suggest it. Don is, he literally wrote the book on travel writing from Lonely Planet. I'm a travel writer, has been writing since the 70s, 80s, on travel. And, it's really like he runs Book Passage, an annual writers event in outside San Francisco, Larkspur, at Book Passage, which is a great bookstore. So if you're ever in the SF area, I highly recommend it. I've known Don. Well, how long have I known you now? I guess it's 2021 now. Man, time goes by. So 10 years, I would say.
Wow.
And, Don's someone I've always looked up to and has been very generous in his advice and time, helping me improve my writing. And, that's one amazing thing about Don is he is so generous with his knowledge and wisdom. And I'm very excited for him to be here with us today, talking about his book. So welcome, Don.
Thank you, Matt. I'm excited to be here. Thank you very much. I feel honored to be part of the book club and to be talking to you all. And it's hard to believe it goes back 10 years. That's kind of astounding, but life goes by fast. A good 10 years. So I'm super happy to be here. Thanks for selecting my book. I'm interested to hear your questions, and I'll just say a little bit about the book and try to save more time for you to ask me whatever you want to ask me about it. But I've been a travel writer since 1980, actually. My very, very first job was as a travel writer at the San Francisco Examiner newspaper. And I've been a travel writer all my life ever since then. And in about 2014 or so, I got the idea that it would be, I'd done a lot of work, never gone into a book. And I was talking with the editor-in-chief of Traveler's Tales. And he said to me, well, why don't you collect, like your best travel stories into a book and we'll publish it. And I thought, wow, that's an interesting idea. I never thought of that. And so I had like 700, 800 articles to go through. And Matt mentioned Candace Rose Reardon, who's an incredible writer and illustrator, artist, human being. And she was a really great help to me. And we sat down and kind of went through all my stories and we narrowed it down and narrowed it down and narrowed it down. And finally we got it down to 33 stories. And they ended up kind of naturally, organically sorting into 3 categories. So those are the 3 chapters in the book. And then we added one story at the beginning as a kind of introduction and one story at the end. And so it's 35 books from my career as a travel writer since 1980. Actually, the very, very first story was published before 1980. It was a story I wrote about climbing Kilimanjaro, Mount Kilimanjaro, which appeared in, of all places, Mademoiselle magazine. And then the last story came out in 2015, just before the book itself came out, and that was for the BBC Travel. So it's a collection of the best of me, articles and essays, pretty widely varied geographically. I tried to choose the stories that I thought best capture what I think travel writing is really all about, which is really, it's a record of 2 contemporaneous journeys. One is it's the author going into the world outside the author, but at the same time going into the world inside the author too, and kind of the interaction of those 2 journeys. So I think most of the stories in the book are meant to capture that interaction, what happens in the world outside me, but what's happening inside me as well, and how those 2 are interacting. So I try to get to kind of the heart and soul of a place and the heart and soul of me and the effect the place is having on me in my writing. I think that's an important thing that travel writers can do. Beyond that, I think I kind of want to let the book speak for itself. I'm incredibly proud and happy that this book is in the world. I feel like, in a way, it's an autobiography or a memoir. It kind of tells the story of the first few decades of my life as a travel writer. And when I did the book, I wrote little introductory paragraphs at the top of each story to give some sense of where I was in my career and what was going on in the world. as a way of following the kind of arc of my own story writing career and of the world too, the world of travel during the years that these stories were being written. So it's a bit of a memoir in that sense. And it's just kind of I like to think that the stories together in book form have so much weight than they do individually. And so I love that it's a thrill for me to think that you all have my book and are reading it or will read it or have read it. And that's really what it's all about for a writer. The sense that my words hopefully moved you, transported you, maybe changed you in some way. That's absolutely thrilling and fulfilling to me. So even just seeing you all and being able to talk to you is a real joy for me. So thank you all for being here. I'm super excited to take your questions. Thank you, Matt, for inviting me. And I'd love to just, answer your questions about the book and talk with you about the book. So yeah, that's it. That's my introduction.
I have some questions about the book and about writing itself. We have a lot of folks in the audience who, are involved in the travel industry in some way. And then we'll take audience questions. So I know Erica wants to make it so I don't ramble on and on. So I will just get to some of these questions. You have 40 years of traveling, from 700 stories here. How do you feel this book captured your years of travel? You had to whittle it down to these, 3 sections. What were you wanted to sort of capture the spirit of travel, but how do you feel this book captures your travel?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the things I wanted to do was span my career. So I was really happy that, from, I guess it was 1979, that Kilimanjaro story was published. And then 2015, the Cambodia story, that's the last story in the book, was published. So I wanted to get that whole span. I wanted to have a great diversity geographically. So I've written more about France and Japan than any other place. And I could have done a book of stories about France or a book of stories about Japan, but I wanted to get geographical diversity in there. So I forget, I think there's about 20 countries or so represented in the book. So I wanted to get the diversity of my sort of travels geographically, and also stories from different parts of my career. I started out for many years at the Examiner Chronicle in San Francisco as the travel editor. I published hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of stories there. But then I went on to, I went to salon.com, where I started the Wanderlust travel sites. There's some pieces from there. I went on to Lonely Planet. I was the global travel editor at Lonely Planet for a long time. So there are pieces from that part of my life. And then I moved on and went to work with National Geographic. So there are some pieces from that part of my life. So I wanted to get a representation of all the different kind of stages of my life as well. And then there's some changes in just writing style that show up. Some of the early pieces are, I think, slightly different from the later pieces. I'm a younger person. I'm writing in a slightly different style. So I wanted to capture that too, the kind of evolution of my writing style through the years. And when you put it all together, and if anybody, for one reason or another, would sit down and actually read the book from beginning to end, you would have a real sense of my evolution as a writer and as a travel writer and editor professionally, and also stylistically, and how the world's kind of influence on me changed over time, and what I took away from the world and what I tried to give back to the world. So I feel like looking at it as a whole now, it covers the arc of my career up to 2015 when the book was published, and geographically and thematically. So I tried to do that with Candace's great help, and I feel like it actually worked.
I always find your writing to be poetic, and you talk about how you were gonna maybe be a poet or a tweed wearing professor at some point.
Right.
And your writing always seems to capture this sense of place and people. I especially love as a Japanophile and a Francophile, I especially resonate with your stories about Japan and France. And I know you've lived in Japan, you speak Japanese, and you run tours there. And so I feel maybe you have a deeper sense of place, and appreciation for that because you know that more. But when you're writing, how do you sort of try to capture that sense of place and people in your work?
Yeah, one of my sort of philosophies is that you need to abandon yourself to a place when you go there. You kind of just have to open yourself up completely, let the place get completely inside you, and just kind of let it take you over. And I try to do that pretty much anywhere I go. And part of it is, when I teach my travel writing classes, I talk about this, but focusing not just on what you're seeing, but what you're smelling, tasting, touching, hearing, getting all of the senses involved and really paying attention to that wherever you are. And part of it's just meeting people, just going up to people and talking to them and getting into their lives that way, in a gentle, enthusiastic way. So I think my goal as a travel writer is to let a place get inside me and get inside a place. And I try to really cultivate that wherever I go. And my quest is to do that. So I'm setting myself up as a traveler to meet people, to have deep experiences. One of the things I always say when I teach travel writing is, you can only write about a place as deeply as you live it. So, your first assignment as a travel writer, I love to say, is to live really, really, really deeply and profoundly and keenly and meaningfully, because you can only write about something as well as you've experienced it. So I try very hard to follow that assignment myself. When I go somewhere, I just throw myself into the place and try to get everything out of it that I can. And I think following that through the years I've sort of refined that practice a little bit. I get a little bit better at losing myself and absorbing a place as the years go by. And that's really for me what it's all about. But thank you for sort of mentioning the poetry. I mean, as you know, I wanted to be a poet a long time ago. When I was a student at university, I was doing creative writing classes. I went to graduate school in creative writing and wrote a book of poetry. And but then naturally my life kind of evolved into travel, and I began to write travel stories, and suddenly I was a travel writer. But the poet never left me. And I love language. I love, focusing on language, the music of language. And so that's a big part of my writing still, is just that focus on every word and trying to make it work as well as it can. And then just getting into the heart of a place.
What I also love about the stories in this book is that they're all so good, right? I mean, obviously they're all great, but even the ones, from way back when, like, they're still so captivating. And so do you have a sense, like, when you were putting these together, of looking back at your original work and realizing, like, oh, this is when I found my voice, or like, this is where I really hit my stride, because even going, like, back to the beginning, you seem to always have, this ability to capture people and places. And is that, when did you really feel like you hit your stride? But how much of, like, your creative writing background really sort of factored into your ability to capture people in a way?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I read my old writing, I'm always kind of astonished. I mean, it's good. And I'm always kind of like, wow, that's actually really good. How did that happen?
That's the exact opposite of me.
Well, it should be. So I think, so I studied, I fell in love with literature in high school, and I majored in literature. I went to Princeton. I majored in literature at Princeton and took creative writing classes and comp lit classes. So literature was always a big part of me and who I wanted to become. I thought I was going to be, like you said, a Tweedy professor of literature. But then getting out into the world, I also always loved travel from an early age. And when I got out into the world, I just kind of fell in love with that sense of being in the world and being free. And there's that moment in Paris that I talk about in the book. I was living in Paris this summer after I graduated from college. And there was a moment when I kind of went down into the street in Paris and I looked around me and France was just all around me. And I had this real epiphany. It was like, I was planning to go back to graduate school and, you know, sit in these musty ivy draped classrooms for many more years and study literature. And I thought, wait a minute, Paris, this is the classroom. This is the classroom of the world. And I fell in love with that classroom. And that's, I've been a student ever since, just wandering around the world, going to school. And so it was that moment in Paris that was a real revelation for me as a writer, that, wow, this is what I want to do. I want to study in the classroom of the world. And then I think when I became the travel editor at the Examiner, San Francisco Examiner, I began to write very personal. I had a column every Sunday. There was my little picture in the newspaper, and I had a column in the travel section. And I began to write very personal essays about how the world was affecting me. And I was really worried about them at first. I thought, this is maybe too personal. I'm not sure readers are going to like this. I'll try one and see what happens. And I wrote the first one and it got a huge, wonderful response from people. So I tried another one and I got a huge, wonderful response from people again. And I thought, all right, people are actually hungry for these very personal stories about how the world is affecting me, that I walk into Notre Dame Cathedral and suddenly I'm in tears. People actually want to read that stuff. They want to know that. And so that really encouraged me to continue writing pretty personally about how the world was affecting me. So that was a real revelation, that I could do that and that people would read it and like it, that it was worth writing. So I think those were the main points for me. I wanted to be a student in the classroom of the world, and I could actually write very personally and readers would respond to that. And then it's just been a kind of a slow evolution, I think. But when I go back and read my early stories, I can still imagine, I still totally remember writing those stories, and I would probably write them differently now. I would be a different person, but I still really I love the story. I love the person who wrote the story, and I kind of like the story that resulted. So I think I've been lucky that, looking back on my career, there aren't any of those stories that I cringe at and go, oh my God, I can't believe I ever wrote that. So that's just lucky, I think.
Well, I also think, really good travel writing, you become sort of the vehicle for other people to experience something. You're just the body, right? And so I think, maybe why people resonate with your writing so much, and why I do, is because when you create that sense of place, I don't see Don there. I envision myself there, and the emotions of that. And then it's not about your experience, about the emotion. Emotions are universal. So
that's great. Thank you.
Good writer transports people, and you transport people. So
well, thank you. I mean, one of the things I always want to do as a writer and teach as a teacher is to recreate your experience so that the reader becomes you. And what I always try not to do is kind of tell the reader what happened, but rather make the reader relive what happened with me. I figure if I can recreate as keenly and profoundly and vividly as possible what I went through, I don't need to tell the reader my conclusion. The reader's going to feel my conclusion. And I still sometimes in my stories go overboard and say finally sort of like what happened to me. But what I try very hard to do is create for the reader what happened to me, so that the reader's actually in my shoes and in my head and exactly living what I lived. And I think if I can do that, then I've been successful as a travel writer. So that's what I'm really setting out to do. So what you just said, Matt, is great, because what I'm trying to do is erase me as a barrier between you, the reader, and the experience I'm writing about. I just want you to be me and totally experience it the way I experienced it. So I'm happy you said that.
Out of the book, right, when people talk to you about the book itself, are there any chapters here that really seem to resonate with a lot of people more than others, you know. And which ones resonate with you? I mean, of course, all of these are special to you, but do you have a couple that are like your super favorites that you're really extra proud of? And, you know, we all like, I like all my articles, but there's a couple that, you know, I like more than the rest.
Right. I tend to think of it like children, you know. I only have 2 children, but I love them both equally. And they're both awesome and amazing. So I kind of feel like each of these stories is awesome and amazing in its own way, like my children. I mean, there's a few, just looking at it, well, I'm going to start reading off all the chapters. They all pretty much mean something to me. The Pilgrim at Stinson Beach story means a lot to me. The Pakistan story really means a lot to me. The Cambodia story, the final Cambodia story really means a lot to me. The South Seas, well, I mean, they all mean a lot to me. The Japanese wedding story means a lot to me. The Musée d'Orsay one does. I love the Greece story. I like a lot of them. Yeah, they all kind of resonate with me still, which I guess is a really good thing.
Well, that's good. And what about with people? Like, I always find that when people approach me and tell me like, oh, I really like this article or this article, it's nice because they look at it in a different way than, you know, you would. And I'm always surprised that like some of the ones I actually don't like the most seem to be the ones that resonate the most with others. Is there any like chapters in here that you have found like really resonate? In fact, everybody, why don't you write in like what were some of your favorite parts of the book?
The Greece story seems to resonate with a lot of people, where I spend a night on an island in Greece where you're not supposed to spend the night. And that's a really wonderful experience. I think for people who've been to Cambodia, the Cambodia story resonates with people because it's such it's a tough, wonderful, anguished, you know, it's a very roller coaster experience emotionally being in Cambodia and kind of coming to terms with the history of the place and then the bright, hopefully bright and shining future of the place, but the very, very tough recent past. That resonates with people. I wrote a piece about Ryoanji Rock Garden in Kyoto, Japan, and just kind of sitting there and losing myself to it and what the effect of that was. And that seems to resonate with a lot of people too. So I think kind of like with travel, what you bring to a place tends to really heavily influence what you get out of a place. And I think what people bring to my stories very heavily influences what they get out of them. And so what they tend to like really depends a lot on where they are in their lives and what they're bringing to the reading, which I think is really wonderful because it means that there's as many versions of this book as there are readers of the book. There's 7 million, I was going to say. I don't think I'm that lucky, but there's 40,000 maybe versions of this book out there, and that's really amazing and wonderful. And I love it when I meet people and they tell me they've read the book and oh, they love this particular story and they tell me why, because I feel like now we've shared little pieces of our lives and we're like pieces of a picture puzzle that now we're forged together in a way, and that's a really great feeling.
Yeah, I mean, I love people connect, and I was, masterclass.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I listen to like all the writing master classes because I mean, I view them as like 3-hour lectures from some of the best writers in the world, and Margaret Atwood was talking about that. Like people bring their own impressions to a book, so you could think like, I'm going to write a story this one way, and this is how it is, and then you're at a book event, and someone's like, "Oh, I really loved how you meant this thing," and you're like, well, that's not what I meant.
That's not right. That wasn't the point at all.
Yeah. But we all take our own experiences, because we built, these worlds in our own mind, and everyone has their own, experience.
Totally. I mean, one of the things you learn as a writer is that you lose control. Once the story's out of your hands, you've lost control of it. It's now in the hands of your reader. And I kind of tried to say that at the end of my introduction to the book. It's kind of like, now, dear reader, I'm sending this book out into the world and it's going to go on its own adventures. And I have no control over those adventures. The book is in your hands now. And, you know, whatever happens is what you do with it. And it's kind of scary because you pour your heart and soul and you try to make the story as perfect as it can be. But then you realize that, okay, it's gone. And people are going to do with it whatever they do. And that's fine. That's how it works. Just like Margaret Atwood was saying, I mean, it's people bring different things and they find different things. And I created that, even though I didn't even realize I was creating it. And that's great. That's a wonderful thing.
Yeah. There are so many questions here that I am going to stop talking and allow everybody else to ask you questions. So, you know, among our other T9 events, we tend to keep people muted, but since this is a book club discussion, Erica will go through and call on people and we will unmute you. So just make sure that, you know, your sound's good and there's nothing going on in the background so we can hear you. So, Erica.
Yep. Got it. There were so many good questions and so many people wrote in some really beautiful things about that last question that Matt asked, just their favorite part of the book. And so I'll share that all with you after, Don. But I wanted to go through I went through the very beginning of the chat and saw where everyone was calling in from. And I'd just like to shout out a few places because this is a very cool call right now. So we have people from LA, Palm Springs, Northern Virginia, San Antonio, Tulsa, Oklahoma, San Diego, Doylestown, Pennsylvania, Vancouver, Washington, Missouri, Oregon, Mississippi, Ithaca, New York, Baltimore, Toronto, Ontario, Victoria, Windsor, Quebec, Calgary, South Africa, Germany, Mexico, the UK, and Beirut.
Wow.
So congratulations.
Thank you.
This is quite a book club.
That's awesome.
Yeah, you guys are amazing. I would love to have Nancy ask her question about Japan tours first, if you'd like to unmute yourself.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Erica. I wasn't expecting to be first. Don, I'm not going to re-say everything I wrote and what everybody else is saying, but thank you so much for this opportunity. And I was just wondering about, because you did write in one of your articles, because I discovered Japan thanks to you, well, particularly Shikoku.
Thank you.
And it is now on my bucket list.
Excellent.
Yeah, but I'd like to know about your tours. The tours that, because I didn't research it anymore. I said I'd talk to you first and see what you say, but are they as personal as your writing?
Oh, yes, absolutely. They're 8 people maximum. And the whole point of the tours is to meet my friends and see the Japan that I love. And yeah, so I do my best to take you into the heart and the soul of real Japan, real old Japan. So I feel like they're very much like my stories. And
is that on your website or like to get the information?
You could email me about it. I'm happy to share. I'll share my email. It's don.george@sbcglobal.net. don.george@sbcglobal.net. So I'm happy to get an email from you and I can tell you more about the tours.
Great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, Nancy. Thank you.
Amazing. And then we have Mindy Olson who has a question. Would you like to unmute yourself? Here.
Okay, hi.
Hi.
I've been reading your work for a long time and I truly appreciate your way with travel, with people, with words. My question is, how has travel writing, I have 2 questions. How has travel writing changed since you started writing? And I think that's linked with how has travel itself changed since you started writing?
Those are great questions that I could probably spend the next 20 minutes talking about. But I think in a nutshell, travel writing has changed, well, hugely. When I was starting out as a travel writer, there were about 10 or 12 Sunday newspaper travel sections and maybe 4 travel magazines. And in terms of publishing as a travel writer, that was it. If you wrote for those, great. If you didn't write for anything, really. And so now, as you know, I mean, the world has changed upside down. There's very few newspaper travel sections even left. The travel magazines have morphed almost indistinct. You almost can't recognize them anymore. And instead, everyone's writing online. So that whole side of travel publishing has changed hugely. And the notion of the gatekeeper, the travel editors used to control everything, and now you control everything yourself because you can have your own blog and your own website. And so that has changed dramatically. And I think that, probably in some ways, broadly speaking, the quality of travel writing has decreased a little bit, but the democratization of travel writing has increased hugely. And so you have access to so many more voices and so many more perspectives and so much more experience and information now than you used to. So I guess in my mind, there would ideally be some sort of a happy medium where there was still some kind of a quality control gatekeeper who was overlooking things and making sure that not just everything got out into the world to be published, but that you also want that democratization of travel rights, that all kinds of voices and experiences are heard. So we're still in the evolutionary phase, I think, and we always will be. And in terms of travel itself, the internet, of course, has changed travel a lot because there's so much information that's readily available now. And I think that's good and bad. The good part is you can learn a lot more easily about the world, and so kind of do more informed traveling that way. The bad part, I think, is that people tend to, no matter where they are, sort of stay in their internet bubble, maybe their social media bubble a little bit more than they should. I used to be the global spokesperson for Lonely Planet. One of the things I would always say is that at Lonely Planet, we're very happy if you buy our guidebooks, but we also want you to leave our guidebooks, in your room someday and just go out and get lost without our guidebooks, because that's what travel ultimately is all about. And I kind of feel the same way. It's good to sort of leave your digital device in your room one day and just wander around and get lost and meet people and see the world without any lens of, I've got to Instagram this, or I've got to, post about this. Just go out and don't post, don't Instagram, don't do anything except live and interact and lose yourself to the place. And I think it's really, really enriching and rewarding when people do that. So I encourage people to do that more often. So that was a very brief answer to 2 really great questions, but I hope that was good.
Yes, thank you very much.
Amazing. We have Iyer, Elda, Susan, and Aaron all asked the same question. So I'll have just Susan unmute herself.
Hi, Dawn and everybody.
Hi.
I just thoroughly enjoyed your book. It was magical. So my question is, do you have a particular routine that you focus on daily when you travel for capturing your memories? Do you also use photos to capture them? I was just so impressed with the detail that you relayed to all of us. And so if you could tell us a little bit about what your travel writing routine is.
Thanks. So when I'm on the road, I always try to make time pretty much every day, or at least every other day, to just sit somewhere and write about it. And by that, I don't necessarily mean my hotel room or, wherever I'm staying, but a market or a cafe or a field, but just kind of plant myself somewhere, look around and start. Sorry, I always carry these journals, these notebooks, and you can see they're just full of scribbles. And that's what I do. I carry my notebook, I sit down at a cafe or a market or wherever, and I spend an hour just writing, and literally writing, like, right now, the old woman in the gray scarf is arguing with the man who hasn't shaved for a few days about the price of the melons. And she's holding the melon, and I just kind of talk about what I'm seeing. And then a week later, or 3 weeks later, or 3 months later, when I read that in my journal, that whole moment comes back to me, and I'm transported back to that day in the market. And that's really super helpful to me. And then I also try to write, I don't do this as well as I probably should, but I try to write at the end of every day or every other day, kind of my general impressions of what's going on, what I'm feeling, what I'm thinking. And I have this notebook with me all the time. So I'm jotting notes down pretty much constantly. And if I have a conversation with somebody that I want to remember, I sequester myself somewhere and just sit down and scribble out all the notes from the conversation that I want to remember. So it's a lot of writing in place, and definitely taking photos. Taking photos kind of frees up my limited mental storage room for other things, so that I know what the place looks like in my photo, so I don't have to worry about remembering that. So I take lots and lots of photos, and then I scoop up brochures, all the information there is available in the place. I scoop up brochures and any other kinds of explanatory materials that I might want, and get all of that. And so that's kind of my on the road writing practice, is to try to carve out these times on a regular basis to sit down and write. And that's super helpful later on when I'm back home. I don't ever try to write I almost never write a full story on the road. I take all the notes and then I get back home and I kind of let the story sift around inside me for a while. And then I start to write the actual story.
Incredible. Kathy Condon has a good follow-up question for your writing habits. Kathy, do you want to unmute yourself? Hold on a second. Can you unmute yourself? Oh no.
Oh, here we go.
Oh, there you go.
Okay, so Don, the thing about it is that I am fairly new to travel writing, and I decided to really read the books, what I considered the best travel writers. And so I was delighted that Matt suggested your book. And I read the 2019 best travel writing stories. In every single case, but yours specifically, is that the use of the words that you have are amazing breadth of vocabulary. How did you start developing your vocabulary?
Well, first of all, thank you for that very nice comment. I really appreciate it. I just loved literature from like high school. I love words. I don't know. I think that came from my mom, probably. She loved, writing also. She wasn't a writer, but she loved reading. So I've always just been kind of attuned to language and to words, and I store words in my brain. And when I find a word that I really love, I put it away somewhere. And I guess that's why I wanted to be a poet, because poets really put a lot of emphasis on each individual word. So I've just kind of built up my vocabulary by reading great literature and absorbing the words and keeping in my head the words that I liked and that I thought were kind of resonant with my life. And one of the things I find is that it's annoying, but when you're reading great literature, you'll come to a word that you don't know, and there's a bit of you sort of want to just skip over it and just keep reading. It's all right. I don't know that word. I'll just keep reading. But I always stop myself and go to the dictionary and look it up because that's the best way to read, really. And so I found a lot of good words that way. I mean, words that I wasn't familiar with, and I come upon it in some great writer's writing, and I go, oh, that's actually a really good word. And then I kind of store it away. And I find that there's suddenly a moment in my own life when that's just the right word for that, and it comes out. So I do think just kind of being attentive to the words in the readings that I'm doing and storing those away. And definitely just taking the time as a writer to stop and say, that's not quite the right word. Find the right word. There's this impulse to just kind of get going, keep moving, finish the story. But at some point in rereading my story, I stop and go, that's not the right word. Find the right word. Just make it as good as you can. So that's a big part of my writing practice, is just trying to make sure that's the absolute right word. That's the word. I've got it now. So that's important to me.
Thank you very much.
Amazing. And then Lindsay Danis had a question about also writing habits. Lindsay, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to hear a little more about some techniques that other travel writers might use, that annoy you or you think is lazy or bad writing, just as a time that we could all learn from someone who's at the top of their game.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate it. One of the things I find, so two huge problems I've found in travel writing. I've been an editor for almost four decades now. The biggest problem I find in travel writing is that the writer doesn't know what the point of their writing is, what the point of their story is. And through the years, I've just found this consistently, that I'll get to page 3 of a story and I'll be thinking to myself, I don't know why you're telling me this. Why are you telling me this? Why are you telling me this story? What's the point of your article? So that's one big mistake I think a lot of travel writers make, is they just start writing. It's like an email to their best friend, but I'm not their best friend, and I'm a reader, and I'm spending time reading their story. So I want them to have thought about it and digested it and actually shaped it. And they're giving it to me fully formed, rather than, I got up in the morning and went down to the beach, had an awesome walk, had a great smoothie. And as a reader, I'm just like, okay, and where are we going with this? So that's one big thing. The other would be, and it's kind of related, that there's this incredibly fine line between, when you're writing very personal travel stories, there's a fine line between saying too much personally and not saying enough personally. And I try to walk that really fine line by asking myself, is this information that the reader needs to know in order to feel what I felt or to get the point that I'm trying to make? And if I feel that it is part of the sort of journey of my story towards this point, if I need to reveal something very personal about myself because it will help the reader understand the end, then it's worth putting into the story. But if it's something very personal about myself that's just kind of self-indulgent, and I just feel like telling you blah, 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 because I'm proud of it or something, but it has nothing to do with the story, then take it out. And I find that a lot of modern travel writing errs on the side of revealing too much about the writer or just saying more than I really need to know. I only need to know what's going to take me to the point of whatever story you're telling me. I don't need to know anything more than that. And I think that's a common mistake that a lot of writers make.
Great. And then Ronnie, do you want to ask your question about pilgrimages?
Sure. So I study modern pilgrimage, and so my ears always perk up when I see the word pilgrimage. And I really love your perspective that all travel can be a pilgrimage if we allow it to be transformative. And I was just wondering how you kind of arrived at that perspective and how your experience on Shikoku informed that perspective.
That's a great question. I don't exactly know how I arrived at that. I think that it was something, I kind of feel like it was the accumulation of my whole life. And I sort of talk about it in part of the book, but I was raised a little bit religiously. My parents went to a Protestant church in Connecticut, and I went to church as a kid, and there was a wonderful pastor there who just talked a lot about love, and who really was kind of a love pastor, a love minister. He talked about love at the heart of Christianity and how important that was. And I think I sort of stopped going to church, but I took the love part with me. And I think I brought that sort of around the world. And there were just moments when I was a very enthusiastic, very energetic traveler from the very beginning. I just loved throwing myself into places and kind of having the place work their magic on me. And I remember like in Notre Dame, how incredibly moving it was to be there. And I think that notion of the world is a sacred place just kind of naturally evolved inside me. And then I realized that it's not just sacred places that are sacred, but Muir Woods is a sacred place. And this incredible field is a sacred place. And so I kind of expanded my definition of sacred and realized that so much of it is what I brought to the place that made it sacred. It was great when I got to Shikoku and I found out about that 88 temple pilgrimage route around the island, because I really did feel like there was some different sort of spirit in the air in Shikoku. And I'm convinced that the molecules of the air are transformed by all of those fervent pilgrims circling the island for centuries. And that when you're there as an open, receptive traveler, those molecules just come into you and they kind of jostle, and you feel like you're a pilgrimage, you're on a pilgrimage right away. And so that was a really, really significant, profound experience for me, being on Shikoku and feeling that. But it's a feeling that I take with me pretty much wherever I go. And I'm happy that that idea resonates with you, because I think that if we allow ourselves to feel that, it makes the world more precious and more special wherever we go. And that's really in our control. We can make that happen. And so I feel that I get more out of life by bringing that attitude to places. So I'm happy that you sort of signaled that. Thank you very much.
That's awesome. Well, Don, we have so many more questions. Is there a way that people could ask you their questions personally? Would that be by email or Instagram, or what is the best way to get in touch with you?
Email is probably great. Email or Facebook. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, whatever medium works for you, but email is easy for me if people want to email me questions.
Yeah, because we have some incredible questions and I'm trying to get through them in a way that makes sense, but I think we're just gonna have David ask the last question. So David, can you unmute yourself?
Yes, thank you, Erica. It's a pleasure to speak with you, Don, and thank you. So, you mentioned earlier living deeply in a place as your approach to the stories that you write. Could you explain a little bit more about that? Is that something that comes subconsciously, or do you go out with a purpose to live deeply in a place? How is that accomplished?
Thank you. I go out definitely with purpose, and I find that kind of in two different ways. One is that I feel like all of us sort of tend to rush through life, and we don't live it as deeply if we do that. So it's really important wherever we are to kind of stop and slow down and say, what am I hearing now? What am I smelling now? When you're in a restaurant, what is this tasting like? Really stop and kind of chew the food and absorb, get the food and get the atmosphere. And so it's a very conscious process of slowing down and paying attention. But then the other thing is kind of consciously allowing myself to make a fool of myself. I've perfected the art of making a fool out of myself, because you go to a foreign place and you don't know the rites and rituals. You don't really know how people are supposed to act, and I try to be respectful and very attentive and learn. But I know I'm going to make mistakes, and I'm okay with that. And I lose a lot more by not wanting to make mistakes and thereby sort of shutting myself off, then I gain a lot more by just opening myself up and saying, I'm going to be very enthusiastic, and I'm going to engage with these people, and I'm going to engage with this culture. And along the way, I'm going to do some really stupid things and people will laugh at me. But ultimately, I'm going to have a much deeper, richer experience. So I talk about cultivating the fine art of vulnerability sometimes. And I think that's a really important thing, to just open yourself up to a place. Don't worry about making a fool out of yourself. You're going to. We're all fools in life, and that's okay. But the idea is to live as richly and deeply and fully as possible. And that's how you get away from the foolishness, because then you're having a really wonderful time. And I want to have a wonderful time. Every day is precious. Every moment is precious. And I really want to get the most out of it.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so that's our last question, Don, for today.
Okay.
We have honestly, please email Don if you have your questions, because they were incredible questions, and I feel bad we didn't get to every single one of them. You guys are an incredible group.
I'll talk less next time. I'll talk even less. But, thank you, Don, so much for joining us. As Edgar said, definitely follow Don on social media or wherever. Pick up his books. And next month, we have David Farley talking about an irreverent curiosity. David Farley, another great travel writer who also teaches our writing course as part of Superstar Blogging. You can check into that. This is a very interesting book about searching for Jesus's foreskin that was lost in this town he ended up moving to in Italy, and just happened upon this interesting story. So we're going to be talking to him next month about that. And Erica has some final wrap-ups for you.
Can I just say thank you to everybody for the really great questions. Thanks, Matt, for having me. Thanks, Erica, for doing a wonderful job taking care of us all. And this is really a huge, huge pleasure for me. So thank you all very, very much.
Thank you so much. Virtual round of applause for
Yeah, it is really a pleasure, and honestly, such a unique experience to get to talk to anyone. I'm a big believer of, or I'm a big behind the scenes enthusiast. So like, I just love getting to know the people behind the books, behind the movies, all this sort of stuff. And so I feel like, the Way of Wanderlust, I'll never look at it and just think, oh, it's a book. I'll think, oh, Don and his smiley face and his stories and his deep way of traveling. So thank you so much for sharing with us today. Okay, we just have some really quick announcements. Again, we would love to invite you to be one of our Patreon community members, and you can find out more about that at patreon.com/nomadicmatt. We love hosting these events for you, and we also love to just know you more deeply. And so we invite you to come check out Patreon. You get tons of perks just by joining, and so that's something to explore if you're loving this community so far. Also, I saw a lot of people were first timers, so I just wanted to let you know that thenomadicnetwork.com/events has all of our events up there for the next few months. And like I said, we do 3 kinds of events. One is events like these, the book clubs. Another one is happy hours. So tonight we actually have a Seattle happy hour. So if you want to come and share your stories, go ahead. And then we also have lots of speaker events. So I just wanted to highlight a few of those. Tomorrow at the same time, we have how to support sustainable tourism through your platform. That will be very interesting. Next Tuesday, we have road tripping through cities and parks across the US with Tej. And then next Thursday, we actually have Mia, who is coming to teach us how to teach online and travel the globe while you're doing it. So these are all events that are, really fun and engaging and teach you how to travel better. So we would love to see you at more of them. And then last but not least, thank you so much for being a part of our travel community. It was just really great to see how many people were calling in from all over the world today. It makes me so happy. And I know this is the kind of community that we were hoping for when we started the Nomadic Network. And you guys are just showing up. Your questions are off the charts. Honestly, I had such a hard time picking through them. And, without a community like you, I don't know if Don would have said yes to this book club of just me and Matt. So thank you guys for showing up. Have a wonderful day. And I shared all the contact information, including Candace Rose Rardin's Instagram, which is one of the best Instagrams I follow. So please go follow. She is an incredible artist and writer. And so, and then definitely ask Don all your questions. He gave you his email, so I think that's free reign.
Exactly.
Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Again, Don.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.